day, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, wow, that was a friggin' horrible start. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another guide for the Warframe universe. Today we're going to be looking at Khora, the delightful individual that she is, the master of beasts, the mistress of whips, and everything else in between for that matter. Now, Khora as a frame has received a lot of change and controversy over the years. She started out being as a very minor frame. She had no real use to her. She's had some changes made to her. She's been buffed a few times. And we're going to look at the basics as to how she plays, how she works, and the sort of builds you're going to look at as a generalized setup. We're not, as a disclaimer, we're not looking into the the absolute pinnacle and the deepest, darkest secrets of her. We're just giving a generalization of certain builds, stat weights, and how you want to play her. So, the main thing with Khora is she is mostly a support, crowd control, backup DPS frame that can then be very useful for your team. Now, the main abilities you're going to be looking at is her one, which is her Whip Claw. Let's get a bit of energy here a second. The Whip Claw is a casted ability and is one of the most fundamental abilities about her. This Whip Claw deals a large amount of damage and creates a small radial explosion at its location, which deals damage to anything that gets hit by it. The range of this whip is based on your range, and this will work in conjunction with one of your other abilities. Now, the other ability we're about to go into here is your 2, which is Ensnare. Ensnare is a fascinating ability that when cast on an enemy will then draw in other enemies near it. So if we look at these guys down here, for example, cast R2 on this guy here, he gets ensnared and put in location, and then he draws other targets to him. This in turn is also based on range, and the length of time that they're crowd controlled for is based on duration. The initial target is crowd controlled for about 25% longer. However, what you're looking at is using this in conjunction with your 1. However, we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. Now, your 3 is your summonable Kavat Venari pet. Like any Kavat, it can be modded. However, I wouldn't recommend putting too many Former into it because it's just really not needed. This pet is extremely lackluster. Considering she is a beast tamer frame, this is a bit of a disappointment because it is the most lackluster part about her. You think beast tamer, you think the beast would be very powerful, but really it's more of just a supporting role. It's just there for the sake of being there. Now, your Kavat, or Venari as it's called, it has 3 different stances. It has aggressive stance, defensive stance, and healing stance. The aggressive stance is where it's going to be very active. It's going to be up in front of them. It's going to be dealing a lot of aggressive type of damage. It's nothing too tremendous, but it does still work things like hunters and munitions, for example. So there's that synergy you can work with there. It does feel a bit clunky with the way the Kavat attacks, and the AI is lacking, to say the least. You'll quite often find your Venari hovering upside down in the midst of nowhere, not even doing anything. So, to avoid confusion, most people will use the Venari for healing purposes, and I'll explain that in a moment. Your other stance is then, and you change stances by holding 3. You have the defensive stance, which it's okay. Basically, your Venari will take a more defensive posture. It'll start knocking down enemies and disarming them. It's still pretty useful, but again, much like the aggressive stance, the AI is a bit hickledy-pickledy. To be fair, by the time it's knocked something down, you've probably killed it anyway. For higher level missions, it might be quite nice, but, you know, it is what it is. It's not the most used one. And then the third stance is probably the most sought-after one, which is the healing one. Your Kavat will start running around and start healing things. It's quite useful. The amount of healing it does is... it's alright, it's enough to sustain you for like mid-level missions, and if you're taking a bit of damage here or there. But it's a nice little addition. Would have liked to have seen maybe a bit more emphasis on the Kavat, or there's at least more of a beast tamer element in the initial state of it. Because if you remember correctly, we did actually do a guide on Khora when she first came out, or at least a run-through of her. And, you know, she's changed a fair bit. This also works in conjunction with her passive. Now, her passive, which I probably should have started this with to be her passive is quite simple. Whilst the Venari is activated, you have a 15% movement boost. It's quite nice. Then your 4 is your big CC ability. It's your Strangle Dome, which is based on range and duration. They deal a small amount of ticking damage based on power strength. Not that you're ever going to really mod for power strength with this, but it can latch onto as many targets as there are cross sections. It's quite a useful ability. It helps you keep control of an area. Passive damage is quite nice for low-level content. And obviously it then puts them in location for you to be able to use your 1 on them. But the thing is, it obviously then doesn't help your 2, so you kind of use one or the other, not both at the same time, unless you're really trying to min-max things. So that's the abilities as a whole. Now we're going to look at a couple of the finesses here. Khora's 1 is very interesting. The Whiplash is based off of the modding of your weapon, and it is one of the only weapon types in the game, one of the only ability types in the game, much like Atlas, that can scale off of the weapon's modding. It also scales with Rivens as well, and it also has a slight attribute to passives. There are 2 weapons that people consider the most optimal for using with Khora in terms of getting their passives in tail. The one being Maya, and then you've got Venka, which has a more active combo multiplier, and it stacks much more effectively. The damage that Whipclaw does is a much more... It also stacks your melee combo, so the higher your melee combo goes, the more damage you're going to deal. Things like Blood Rush don't work with this, so you're going to look at dealing as much base damage as possible with as much... with an element of some kind. Corrosive and Viral tend to work quite nicely, and then getting whatever you can on the rest of it is super, super nice. So... your 1 is the synergy in conjunction with your melee weapon and your 2. Because your 1 and your 2 work quite nicely together. And what I'm referring to by that is when you have it targets that are ensnared, so if we just ensnare one of these guys here, targets that are ensnared then get pulled in. Any target that's ensnared then takes double damage from your Whiplash. And because you're stacking up your combo multiplier, the damage ramps up incredibly quickly. To the point where Khora has possibly one of the highest damage potentials of any frame in the game, assuming you keep that combo multiplier going. You'll notice that because of the Venka Prime passive, I'm already at a 3.2 multiplier, which is extremely powerful. There aren't many frames in the game that have that level of scaling in terms of combo multiplier. And this is against level 155 enemies, bear in mind. So the damage potential is staggering. So we're going to show that again, just to show what it's like in an actual realistic situation where the enemies are flying towards you. So we've got all these enemies in the area. Obviously, the more enemies there are, the more you can raise your combo multiplier. So I'm going to bring them all in. I'm going to lap that down. Watch that they all get pulled in like the majestic things they are. So this is obviously going to give us a big combo boost. And the actual energy consumption of the Whipclaw as well is incredibly low, even off the bat. So you're going to be dealing an absolute hectic ton of damage. Now, there are some other finesses to go in with this. I would highly recommend reading Khora's wiki. There's a bunch of things that go into the Whipclaw that can really affect how it works. But the fundamentals is, have a good melee weapon. You could even use just a stat stick if need be. It's just that the passives of Maya and Venka are what make them optimal. So, other than her execution, you sort of see what she does. She's crowd control, she does a bit of damage, she's got the usefulness of her Kavat. In terms of builds, there are 2 main builds you can look at. Because the effectiveness of your shackle is based on range and duration, there is absolutely no need to build for power strength on Khora. So the only mod that I would say is absolutely fundamentally needed is natural talent, because it means you're casting the Whipclaw faster. The faster you cast the Whipclaw, the more stacks you're getting, the more damage you do. So as it stands, this is a really good zero former build. Armored agility is a complete optional thing. I personally use it if I'm not using the augment. I'll mention the augment in just a moment, in fact. So this is a super good, super early game build. This, as you saw, this was what was doing me justice a moment ago. If you want to maybe have a more potent build based on dealing more damage with more potency of abilities, then this would work even better. Now, the augment, as mentioned before, this is an incredibly powerful augment. Hitting 3 enemies will grant a 35% stacking damage bonus to a subsequent Whipclaw's bonus will decay after 10 seconds. So, you can already imagine, as you're bringing targets in, they're already going to be affected by Whipclaw, and then that passive shoots up very, very quickly. So just to prove a case in point, we'll do this one more time, because I know there's nothing more delightful than watching a bunch of infested enemies dying in horrible pain and agony. Let's bring them in. Obviously, you do want to make sure you have your melee weapon at all times, otherwise the stack modifier doesn't work tremendously well. So we're going to deal that. That's 3. There's the damage buff, 140%. Yeah, that's some major damage. And I don't believe there's I believe there is a cap to the snack, but it's not going to really matter. By the time you get to, I think, 300%, it's going to be killing almost anything. Like we can prove a point here with let's choose an Xmas target and we'll see just how far it can go. So let's go with Elite Lancer Xmas. These guys are pretty damn tough. In any situation, you'll never really be going up against level 155s, these guys. But just to put case in point, we now have level 155 Xmas on the field. So you got to realize as well that obviously this is against enemies of this nature. So you watch as the damage starts stacking quite fast. And obviously, with only one efficiency mod, it's already dealing insane levels of damage. So it's already at 355% damage modifier, and it's hitting them for an insane amount. So that is Khora in a nutshell. Her augment makes her DPS insanely potent. She has a crowd control which can be very, very powerful when used in the right way. Her 2 and her 1 in synergy with each other are very powerful as well. Modding your melee weapon to have to be a stat stick with a decent weapon with a passive, for example, Maya or Venka, again the 2 most used ones. Other passives can work, however you want to do your research to make sure if they do work in synergy with it or not. There are some like Legion which might be mistaken for working, but that one doesn't, so again, do your research. And that's it really. Khora is a very fun, very simple frame. She's definitely been elevated from the run-of-the-mill poopy that she was originally. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have, leave a comment down below and a like on the video. It really helped me a lot. If you want to see more of this sort of content, please tune into my Twitch channel, which will be linked in the description below. And I will see all of you top hatters in the next video. Ta-ra!